So this is question B for section 8. So it talked about the idea of standard of living and GDP being a possible measure of that. The trick that most people struggle with to start with is actually what on earth does standard of living mean and what does GDP mean? And so I think being able to compare and contrast those two things, the standard of living is to do with quality of life, access to basic necessities. And could be even things like happiness and satisfaction. Gross domestic product, is a really kind of economic measure of economic output. The other one is more quality of life. And so I don't think if you didn't explain those two things to start with, that the rest of the essay really struggled. And then those two ideas are the things that helped you in the conclusion at the end. But generally, most people were pretty good here. So GDP by itself is probably not enough. GDP being is really important. Per capita, so looking at population differences. People went into differences here around, talking about income disparity. So even per person is not really enough because it could disguise the differences within the country. Lots of people talked about sustainability issues, which was nice to see, the degradation of natural resources. Environmental costs, market failure as being an issue with GDP. There's lots of other ways to go with this. So people also talked about gross national income as being an issue. So how you define it with you've got multinational companies into this scenario. So not many students did this, and this was a nice example of someone kind of coming up with, well, what are some other ways to measure standard of living? So people talked about happiness indexes, talk about human development index, life expectancy, so something other than GDP as being a way. And then this last conclusion is important. So this justifies your relative choice around which might be the best way, especially when you're thinking about how you compare between countries. So that gives you an idea. Examples are important here, actually. So coming up with some kind of way to introduce a country like Indonesia, perhaps, China, Brazil was the example we used in this essay here a couple of times. That's kind of the thing you need to get into the top criteria.